بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب صلى الله عليه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. Pray you all well. And as Rasulullah, peace upon him, said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Allahumma barik lana fi Rajab wa Sha'ban wa balighna shahra Ramadan. O Allah, may you bless us in Rajab and Sha'ban and make us reach Ramadan, inshallah. By grace of Allah, we are continuing the tafsir of Surat al-Masad and dealing with the very important question of disbelief or kufr, and how Abu Lahab is described in the surah and by the Mufassirin. Why is he regarded as both a kafir and a mushrik, a disbeliever and a polytheist? And what implications does the condemnation of Abu Lahab have in the surah, that he's condemned to the hellfire along with his wife? What implication does this have on free will, which we've already discussed, but I want to conclude it today. So the fact that Allah condemns him, but condemns him during his life while he's alive and has the free will to change his faith. And two, how do the Mufassirin as well as the Fuqaha, the jurists, define disbelief? So what implications does this surah have on how we understand what kufr is, and then the implications on the ahkam or rulings that we derive in categorizing believers, disbelievers, or Ahlul Kitab, or those who are dalal, those who are astray. How do we define these terminologies, and then the implications this has on the purity of their beliefs and even their bodies in terms of the najasat? So you might, inshallah, find this interesting, because I am humbly tackling these questions because I had these questions in reading the surah. So it's I wanted to find out what were the different opinions, and how can we resolve perhaps some of these conflicts, inshallah. So let me share the screen with you. So what we concluded last week, I gave you two types of answers, right? So in Majm al-Bayan, Allama Tabrisi, rahimahullah alayh, says that faith is a taklif, which means that everyone has a human responsibility to search for the faith, and it's something we are divinely held accountable for. This is one opinion. So Muslim, non-Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, secular, atheist, whoever the person is, everyone has a divinely accountable responsibility to search for the faith of Allah and to have the belief in Allah. There is a question here, which I sort of put in brackets. Is it simply believing that everybody is responsible to believe in God, or to seek knowledge and believe in God? There are two different things. If everybody is in a way obligated to believe in God, then it means that whatever their position, they have to end up arriving in belief in God. Even Abu Lahab, and that's why he's condemned in the surah. That's why we have this, the verse is revealed, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Sayasla naran dhata lahab, soon he will enter the blazing fire. And so the reason given by Allama Tabrisi is because God warns him through the surah that if he doesn't believe, then there will be a punishment. So this makes sense, because he is obligated to believe. He chose not to believe. The surah was a warning to him, and therefore he will be punished. Because even though the surah was revealed in his life, Allah knew that he wouldn't believe, hence the punishment. But he still had the free will and free choice. But Allah knew that he wouldn't, hence the revelation of this surah. But the most important thing here is that he says that Iman is a taklif. That means something that we are responsible to fulfill, like salah or siyam, fasting, right? So keep that in your mind, this notion that everybody is obligated to believe. But the bigger question, inshallah, which I want to try to at least introduce is, but what happens if you're in a different environment and you don't know anything about faith, and you might be misinformed about religion, or you look at the news or look at history and you think religion is all about war? I don't need to go and search for this faith. I don't need to search for Islam or belief in God. What about that? So this is my point, that when we say taklif, not everybody can fulfill that based on their bi'ah. Bi'ah is environment. And Allama Tabatabai, he says that God's decree doesn't invalidate man's free will, because the biggest question is, well, Allah is not giving Abu Lahab a chance to believe, he's already condemned him. So he makes a very important point that God's decree already operates in relation to or with consideration of our free will. So God's decree or qada is not disconnected to our free will. So whatever God is decreeing is already in consideration of our hurriya or our free will. He has knowledge of our choices and then decrees accordingly based on his knowledge. If, however, we were to say that if Abu Lahab chose Iman, then that means his free will is operating outside of God's decree, which would be impossible because God is Sami'un Alim, he's all hearing and all knowledgeable. So the deeper point that Allama Tabatabai makes is that you have to connect God's decree and our free will together, and then it makes sense. But if you don't connect them, then it means that the free will is operating outside of God's domain. There are still further questions we have to ask there, which I talked about last week, which is, how does God respond to our dua, our supplication? Either we say that he already knows that we are going to ask and then responds accordingly, or is it that we ask and then God acts? Now, the second one has a positive and negative trait there. The positive is that if you say that we respond, we do dua and then God responds, that makes Allah very personable, makes Allah very intimate to us. And it's very nice to know that he's listening and then responding. And that makes Allah very personal, a very personal being, which is very beautiful, because it shows Allah is really listening and then he's responding to a personal situation. The criticism of that view is that, well, it also means that maybe God didn't know something, or he is, even if he knew it, he is acting based on our needs and our du'as. And the criticism is that God doesn't need that. God is needless. He's ghani. He's self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything. Why does he need to have an intimate relationship with us? Why does he need to listen to us before making a decision? Why does he have to wait for our dua? Do you see that? It's a kind of criticism there. But I think that can still be reconciled, because we don't want to remove that intimacy and personal nature of Allah to us. So I still feel that even if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, humbly feel that even if Allah wants to listen to our dua and then respond, that doesn't make him needful, as if he needs us. It just makes him intimate and loving. So there is still a lot to unpack there, and it's like walking on a tightrope, because we don't want to make God as somebody that's subservient to us and kind of has to listen to our dua to make a decision, but at the same time, we don't want to make him so transcendent that he can't relate to us. Okay. Now, where it gets very interesting is that Allama Tabatabai, in his Tafsir al-Mizan, refers to these two verses to explain the inner state of Abu Lahab. He says, and you've all heard these verses in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 6, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna alladhina kafaru, sawa'un alayhim andartahum am lam tundirhum la yu'minun. Indeed, those who disbelieve, whether you warn them or don't warn them, they will not believe. That's the first one. So here, the disbelievers are a group of people who, whether you warn them or not, they would not believe. That is Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab is a perfect example of verse 6 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Inside, he is not going to believe. There is a stubbornness, there is a denial. We say jahad. There is a denial, a disavowal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he quotes from Surah Yasin, which we all recite, for example, commonly. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. لَكَدْ حَقَّ الْقَوْلُ عَلَىٰ أَكْثَرِهِمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Indeed, the word or the statement has proved true upon most of them, but they do not believe. So even when the word, the statement, the message of Allah is true on most of them, and it can be proven, it is true, it is verifiable, they will not believe. So here in the second one, that is Abu Lahab is also an example, but you also have another dimension here, that whatever whatever has been revealed to us and whatever the Anbiya are propagating are claims that can be proved as true to the human mind, and they can be verifiable. So here, this relates to human logic, because some people might say, well, people are faithless and they don't believe, right? Fine. But on what basis is the question? And that's why I posed the first question about the environment they're in. What are they receiving? Are they receiving claims that are accessible, that can be proved true, that can be verifiable through human logic? Then that's good. And if that's the case, and if they still don't believe, even if something is logical, then that's an example of kufr. But if a statement has been misinformed and not proved true, then that's another question altogether. It's like the media distorting the meaning of Islam and the behavior of Muslims. So again, it shows that two very important things, that revelation is verifiable through human logic, and two, if a message has been misinformed and not verifiable, then that's another question, and somebody may not believe because of that, like listening to the media. Now, who is a kafir? And I don't want to repeat this because we did this in the Tafsir Surat al-Fatiha, but kafir comes from the verb kafara yakfiru, which means, you can see the meanings here, to cover, hide, be irreligious or be an infidel, that is to disavow or reject Allah, blaspheme, and be ungrateful. There are several meanings to this. It's not purely just denying Allah. It also indicates on some inner states, like being ungrateful to Allah, denying the blessings of Allah, covering, hiding the truth when you know it. That is also a form of kufr. So there are different dimensions of kufr. It's not just to say this person's a kafir because ostensibly or apparently he or she doesn't believe in God. Well, what kind of disbelief? What led to that disbelief? Is it a disbelief with knowledge, a disbelief without knowledge? Is it a disbelief with stubbornness, a disbelief without stubbornness? And you'll see this in our philosophers and jurists' writings, which I'll try to introduce, inshallah. And so what we can say, one definition, just to kind of make it easy, is a kafir is someone who is ungrateful. This term is used for disbelievers because of the things Allah has given them, that they are ungrateful to Him and deny Him. So ungratefulness and denial come together in one of the definitions of kafir. So just to keep this in mind, that yes, kafir is a disavowal and denial of Allah and an ungratefulness of Allah, but there are some nuanced dimensions to the term. Now, these are the questions that I posed, which maybe you also have in your mind, right? But I wrote them down. How do jurists define disbelief? If you are a philosopher or a mystic, would the definition change? Because jurists are concerned about law and deriving ahkam, rulings, and seeing who is a Muslim, who is not, for the purposes of najasat, for the purposes of war, of jihad. So there is a practical element to categorizing kafir. But if you're a philosopher or mystic, you're not concerned with that. You might be more concerned with some of these, inner states of the soul and the meaning of that, and how you arrive at belief and disbelief, which are deeper questions, equally, if not more important, in fact. 2, if disbelief in God is incorrect, fine, we can accept that, and a form of rebellion against Him. How does this affect the disbeliever's soul and body? So this is a question I've always had, even since my teenage years, which is, well, even if you say somebody's a disbeliever, fine, how does it affect your soul and body? How do you make the move from disbelief to saying that somebody is impure in their soul and then somebody is impure in their body? These are big steps to make. So how did we arrive that disbelief leads to some physical najasat? And you will see this in the writing, which I'll share with you, inshallah. Can a disbeliever still be moral and therefore possess a level of purity in his or her soul and body? So you may meet disbelievers. I met, I have a colleague who is a disbeliever, but he's extremely moral and very honest and very helpful, in fact. He was actually one of my mentors when I joined the university. You have to have a mentor, somebody that you can ask and guide you in terms of teaching and all that. And he was the most helpful person that I met. So again, these are just questions coming from experience. I mean, if most of us scholars are saying that disbelievers are condemned and they are najis, okay, but if they are moral and helpful, does that mean there is still a level of purity in his or her soul? Do they get reward for their morality? And 4th, which I posed, how do you prove that disbelief or polytheism in the soul affects the najasat of the body? So these are the reason I pose these questions, because the Surat al-Lahab itself, if you look at the whole surah, I mean, we've now done all the verses except for the last 2, which I want to conclude next week, inshallah. But we are basically doing the last 4 and 5 as well. We're trying to deal with these deeper meanings. Abu Lahab is the uncle of Rasulullah, 1. So Abu Lahab and the Prophet had contact for their whole lives. Even when Rasulullah, peace upon him, is growing up as a child, Abu Lahab is there as the uncle, and he has his aunt there. So they would have touched each other. Perhaps the Prophet ate at their houses, different people's houses, or they ate together as a family. We have to pose logical questions here. But the uncle is a mushrik and a disbeliever. So what then happens to Rasulullah's life if, as a child, he's growing up and physically interacting with the family, right? Does that mean the Prophet is affected? Or does that mean he is protected? Does that mean Abu Lahab is najis? How does the Prophet protect himself? You see, there are 100 questions here to ask. And the Prophet is living in a polytheistic society. And so clearly the food that he is eating is largely going to be prepared by polytheists. Yes, of course, when he breastfed, again, you can say there were good midwives and Halima and such midwives, because he didn't just have one, he had 2 or 3 midwives. The people who gave him breast milk, again, what beliefs did they hold? How did that affect the Prophet? Or it didn't affect Rasulullah? Do you see the questions I'm trying to pose here? So I'm posing this question because this surah is mentioning a family member of Rasulullah, is condemning the family member of Rasulullah and his aunt. So naturally the questions will be, what were the interactions between the Prophet and his family members? And 2, if you're talking about the condemnation of someone, what is the justification of that? Now, in the Tafsir, Abu Lahab is mentioned with 2 terms, sometimes together and sometimes apart. These 2 terms are kafir and mushrik. Sometimes he's referred to as a kafir, sometimes a mushrik, or sometimes together. So are disbelief and being polytheist connected? This is the reason why I'm posing these questions. Let's at least begin to answer them, okay? So I want to share with you, hold on. Yep. This book, Religious Diversity in Contemporary Shi'i Thought, the views of Ayatollah Abdullah Jawadi Amuli, who Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, by the way, has written to Tafsir Tasneem, which we have occasionally referred to in our different Tafsir lectures, and Professor Mahmoud Ayub, who I believe is a professor in one of the American universities, both, of course, respected Shi'i scholars. And it's authored by Saeed Subhani. Saeed Subhani, I purchased this book. My father was able to go to Hujjat bookshop, may Allah bless him, because I requested this and he was there, so I got it. And I've started to read it, and I've started to select the relevant passages. I'm humbly recommending you to buy this if you can, because it deals with religious pluralism and salvation, right? So, and it's in easy to understand English, and it gives you some of the classical views of scholars, not all, but some, and some of the views of Western philosophers, and you get to know the diversity in our views. Now, I'm going to introduce you to 2 scholars, right? Where you can just see the difference of opinion here, okay? To show you that these questions are not easy to answer. Sheikh Tusi, who has written Tibyan fi Tafsir al-Quran, who we have also referred to in these different Tafsir series. Respected scholar, one of our earliest Shia scholar, died 11th century, all right? He compiled 2 of our ahadith books, Tahdhib al-Ahkam and another one. So he compiled 2 of the books of the Kutub al-Arba, the 4 books, right? In his tafsir, right, this is what he quotes, right? He quotes this verse, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna dina indallahi al-Islam. We've all heard this. Indeed, with Allah, the religion is Islam. And those who were given the book did not differ except after knowledge had come to them, out of envy amongst themselves. And whoever defies Allah's signs should know that Allah is swift at reckoning. So he cites this verse saying that Allah, the religion with Allah is Islam. Okay, that's it, Islam. Yes, there are people who are given the book, right, that did not differ except after knowledge had come to them, out of jealousy, out of envy. Whoever defies the signs of Allah, Allah is swift at reckoning. Now, he defines Islam as the following here. Islam and faith are synonymous. This is very important. Islam and Iman are the same thing. Some have a different opinion about that. But according to him, Islam and Iman are the same thing. So Islam, which means performance, which means the articles of faith and the performance of the actions in relation to those articles of faith. So belief in God, and then what God has revealed in terms of Salah, Siyam, Hajj, all of these things we say is Islam. Faith itself is your submission to God, your inner state in what you believe, which other people may not know, by the way. It may be your faith may be without performing Salah or Siyam, but it is your inner state and your inner belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your submission to Allah. Whereas Islam is associated also with the practical teachings that realize your faith. So Islam includes the outer as well as the inner. Some say that Islam is just the outer and Iman is the inner, and some say Islam is both outer and inner. But faith is definitely the inner, your inner submission to Allah. So he says, whoever accepts the teachings of Prophet Muhammad is a Muslim, otherwise he will be considered a kafir. And to substantiate his view, he uses a hadith about Jews claiming to be Muslim, but they did not perform Hajj, so they were not Muslim. So this is very interesting. There were some Jews during the Prophet's time who said, we are Muslim because we submit to God. So you see that if you take the approach, the meaning of faith here, you can say that a Jew could be a Muslim because he submits to Allah. And that's why I've put here that there is a difference of opinion in the translation. Islam can mean Islam as the religion of Rasulullah and the Quran, etc. Or it means the religion as submission to Allah. They're two different things. Because a submission to Allah means many people can be Muslim. If you take Muslim with the small m, people everywhere in the world are submit to God, right? Of course, if they then identify with a particular religion like Christianity and Judaism, that's a different matter. But if somebody believes in God, you could say as a Muslim. Or you could say that's not right. And you say it's Muslim with a capital M. And that means somebody that has to adopt and follow and believe in Prophet Muhammad and the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad and the Quran, because peace be upon him and his family. So he gives this example that the Jews were not Muslim, they did not perform Hajj, so they are not Muslim. So he is taking a very, I would say, literal and hadith-oriented approach to the meaning of Islam, saying that you have to follow Prophet Muhammad, if not, you are a kafir. So there's no sort of in-between there in terms of somebody that may not believe in the Prophet, but may believe in God. What about that? Right? This is a question mark here. Somebody also that is a Jew and Christian may receive salvation, but if they are aware of Prophet Muhammad, no, they would not. So even today, Jews and Christians who are aware of Prophet Muhammad, according to the teachings of Sheikh Al-Tusi, they would not reach salvation if they're aware of Rasulullah. Because you have to follow Rasulullah because he is the final messenger. But if they were not aware of Rasulullah, then perhaps they may receive salvation because they're following their book. But you can see the approach here, okay? I'll end on the next slide because look, I have further slides here about which I wanted to deal with, which is what does Ayatollah Sistani say about who is a kafir? And then I've put the Arabic and English from Minhaj al-Salihin. And you see the difference between the Tawdi al-Masail and the Minhaj al-Salihin here in terms of the definition of kafir. And then how that affects Najasat. Ayatollah Sani, who recently passed away, he has a different definition of kafir. And Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi, right? We'll deal with that inshallah next week because unless you want me to do it, I can still spend more time if you would like me to. But let me at least do this slide and then you decide what you want me to do. Mullah Sadra passed away in 17th century. Arguably the greatest Shia philosopher, as some people say after Ibn Sina and Suhrawardi. His text Asfal Arba is studied in Shia seminaries and respected by all Muslims. Mullah Sadra, the philosopher and mystic, look what he says. Look at the difference. He says the true religion is Islam. So he doesn't dispute with the classical mufassirin there, like Sheikh Tusi. The true religion is Islam. He doesn't accept that Christianity is the right religion and Judaism is the right religion. He says, no, the true religion is Islam. But look at the nuanced meaning here. He says, those who have sincerely attempted to achieve the truth, but have failed to reach it, would be saved. Look at the beautiful nuance here. Therefore, sincerity and purity play a big role in salvation. Subhanallah. Look at this beautiful nuanced meaning. So that's different to Sheikh Tusi, because Sheikh Tusi did not go into the sincerity and purity of the soul. And in Surat al-Masad, Abu Lahab lacks the sincerity and lacks the purity. Hence why Allama Tabatabai quoted these verses about the stubbornness, if you like, of the kuffar. So he says, if you try to achieve the truth, but fail to do so for whatever reason, your misinformation, environment, you tried your best, you can still achieve salvation with Allah, because what's important is your niyyah, your intention, your ikhlas, your sincerity, and the purity of trying to strive for Allah. That's why I posed the question that a kafir who is moral, but not stubborn, right? He might disbelieve in God for logical reasons, but he's got a purity in his soul or her soul. He's not stubborn. He doesn't believe in God for logical reasons. He tried. He actually tried to find Allah, but couldn't. Would he be saved? Possibly. Or there's a chance for him in the akhirah. Somebody that doesn't have a religion and strives, but does not reach that belief, could still be saved. Reach is something, we could say, well, I believe in force. My friends in secondary school, when I used to ask them in philosophy class, I said, what do you believe in? One of my friends, I still remember this, says, well, I'm not sure about God, but I believe in a force. According to Mullah Sadra, that person could achieve salvation. And then here, look at this. Even those who worship God, but have a wrong understanding of Tawheed, would be saved. So you worship God, but you have a wrong understanding of Tawheed, would be saved. So you might put other religions there. I'm not an expert on Hinduism, but in the classical scriptures, the notion of one God is there, of Bhagwan as well is there. Now, maybe they have a somewhat incorrect understanding of God in terms of idols and these sorts of things. Fine. Maybe, for example, even we might say, even as Shias or Sunnis, we might have an incorrect understanding of God. Maybe we exaggerate attributes of prophets and imams, for example, and that affects our understanding of Tawheed. Right? We have this issue, in our religion, classically and even today. We have other religions that believe they're worshiping God, but somehow their understanding of God in some manner is incorrect. According to Mullah Sadr, they may still be saved because they are still trying to conceive of God. This is important. They're trying to conceive of God, even if that conception is incorrect. He also says even the idol worshippers who inwardly worship the transcendent God would be rewarded. So maybe not saved, but rewarded. Or maybe they have an option of salvation in the akhirah. I don't know. But if inside, however they worship the idol, but there is sense that it is Allah giving them something, perhaps they can be saved. And he says we have an external and internal prophet. So the external prophet is Rasulullah, or all the prophets, and the internal prophet or Rasulul Batin, the inner messenger, is your inner guide, your conscience, your fitrah, guiding you, which no one knows except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one knows what our inner conscience and guidance is actually telling us. So that's why you need both. You need the external prophet That's why we believe in prophets. It's not like a belief because we have to. It's a belief because they are guiding us. We go back to their teachings to assess whether our belief in God is correct or not. And then our internal prophet verifies it. Our inner messenger verifies, is Prophet Muhammad telling the truth? Is the Buddha telling the truth? Is a Hindu mystic telling the truth? We then have to assess for ourselves this information, make a judgment. And the most important thing here, what prevents us from reaching salvation is pride and enmity. It is that stubbornness and enmity that, God forbid, I say I hate Allah. God forbid, because I don't like my life. Or like Abu Lahab, I'm jealous of Rasulullah and I want to, I have enmity with him and enmity with his God. I'm not going to listen. There's that stubbornness of not even trying to listen to another person's point of view, which affects Muslims and non-Muslims, which affects scholars, non-scholars. This notion that we are absolutely right in our understanding, and there's nothing that we can understand more or improve on more, or just enmity with God and Rasulullah. So the reason I juxtapose the two is because you see the view of a philosopher and mystic, and you see the view of a jurist and a mufassir, and may Allah bless both of them. They have their interpretations and opinions. Let me, I hope, inshallah, that is clear for you. I've set the discussion up so you can see that there are nuanced dimensions of how to define kafir or mushrik and the implications this has on salvation. If you want me, I can continue to do the jurist views, but maybe we do that next week. It is quite heavy, but I will stop there before the Q&A. Please can recite Surah Al-Fatih for all the mu'mineen, marhumin, and all human beings, inshallah. Surah Al-Fatih.